Good morning, everyone. Today we will be understanding the emergence of political history in Indian subcontinent. If you understand, Indian history starts from the emergence of Mahajanapadas. So clearly speaking, the Indian political history can be dated to 600 BC. Can be dated to 600 BC. The question comes in our mind, why Indian history is only started understanding from 600 BC? What happened to prior that period? If you understand Indian history, the evolution of Indian history, its chronological order, we will speak about Indus Valley civilization, and then the Vedic period, and then the later Vedic period, and then we speak about Mahajanapadas. The question comes in our mind, the Mahajanapadas concept took its roots in a very earliest text called the Arthasastra. So today we will try to focus why this Arthasastra is considered to be one of the greatest political treatises ever written by any political scientist, and what is the significance of the text in the current period. The question comes in our mind, what is Arthasastra? We will try to understand this topic of today's lecture in the four major areas. We will try to focus first the introduction part, and then we will speak about the contents that are mentioned in Arthasastra, and then we will be going to the Saptanga theory of state, and finally its relevance today, called its influence on Indian politics, the later political history period. Let us start the first part, introduction. As we discussed earlier, that Indian history and the history of Indian subcontinent had its roots from very ancient period, so-called prehistoric period. Prehistoric period is a period where we don't have any script, and that kind of period was called prehistoric period, commonly considered as a Stone Age period, and slowly entering into a period of Chalcolithic. It was the period of Indus Valley civilization. We call that phase as proto-historic phase. The reason why we call Indus Valley civilization period falls in proto-historic, because we had a script, but we are unable to decipher it. And the period from the later Vedic period, the end of late Vedic period, so-called 600 BC, we start calling the emergence of Mahajanapadas. The political history started taking its roots from 600 BC. The question comes to our mind, why only 600 BC? If you look at the various sources, one of the most authenticated source that explains Indian political history's emergence, it is Arthasastra. Understanding the text Arthasastra, many believe the text is all about politics, but that's partly right. Arthasastra speaks not only about politics, it speaks about economics, it speaks about foreign policy, it speaks about law, it also speaks about ethics, and that all required for administration. You may call it private or you may call it public. Yes, it involves all the administrative aspects for the first time discussed in this text called Arthasastra. It's not of 2,500 old text, one of the oldest treatises written on political thoughts. If you look at the concept of Arthasastra, the word Ardha can be literally called by many scholars as resources. Can be called as resources. And the word Shastra means systematic study. So, this right in calling Arthasastra is a systematic study of resources. Is it only about resources? What exactly resource over here refer? Resource over here requires the essential material, raw materials required for making a state strengthen. Arthashastra not only speaks about acquiring resources, it also speaks about protecting those resources. That means we can conclude Arthashastra is about a systematic study of resources in acquisition and in its protection. The question comes to our mind, why this text has become so popular? Is that just because it's being one of the oldest texts? The answer is not really. This text was considered to be one of the best written form. No doubt in Sanskrit it was written. It's written in Sanskrit. In the Arthashastra, the text written by Kautulya, also called Chanakya, also called Vishnugupta. Still we have a debate calling all the three are not the one. In that text, Kautulya mentioned that he is writing this treatise in the newest form, that already certain treatises existed earlier, and is now creating a new commentary. So we can call Kautulya was a political scientist who understood the political treatises happened prior to his period and compiled them into a very proper systematic study. Very proper systematic study. That clearly shows that Arthashastra is written by Kautulya by taking inspiration from the earlier texts that helped those periods, that helped those kings rule their kingdom the better way. So, let us consider about Arthashastra and its significance and why we call the 600 BC period as emergence of political period. Because if you look at the period in Indus Valley civilization, we have no idea what kind of political system prevailed at that point of time. Many reasons because, or how can we come to this conclusion? Because we are unable to decipher the inscriptions, unable to decipher the script prevailed at that point of time. So we have no idea what kind of political history prevailed at that point of time. A period between 3300 to 700 and 1750 BC. From the period of 1500 to 1000 BC, we call it as early Vedic period, and we had certain understanding for Rig Vedic text, claiming this period was ruled by certain groups, and we call that period might be egalitarian society, and definitely the polity prevailed at that point of time can be called as oligarchy. That means polity ruled by few people. The head, who is called Raja, the king. When I say the word king, is not the king in the real sense. The head of the tribe was assisted by four major branches, four major bodies: Sabha, Samiti, Vidata, Gana. It was in the later Vedic period. It is from 1000 BC to 600 BC period. The concept of the head of tribe turned into monarchical phase. Slowly the concept of Rajan started. And now one tribe is fighting with another tribe. Normally called one grama is fighting with another grama. And it was called Sangrama. This Sangrama led to the continuous fight. And they initially fought for food. And then in the Vedic period, we came to know that man fought for cattle. If you look at in the later Vedic period, wars are happening for the first time for sake of land. So we can conclude land is one of the major resources. So Kautilya here trying to focus on acquiring this resource and protecting that resource. The earliest text that speaks about a fight between two tribes for sake of land is mentioned in the 7th mandala of Rig Veda called Dasharaja Gana Yuddha. It was later on in the 600 BC period we came to know that in the later Vedic period it was Mahabharata war, the famously called Kurukshetra war, fought between the Pandavas and Kauravas. From that point of time, there was a continuous struggle, fight for existence. And this fight finally shaped a new political system. And this political system was later on systemized and strengthened. So we can conclude that the Arthasastra spoke about how these struggles can be overcome and how a kingdom can live in peace, tranquility, solace. If you look at the dating of Arthasastra, it was believed, was written in the 4th century BC period, but still we have many debates. We conclude that the text was written by Kautilya, especially if you look at some shlokas in Arthasastra, where you see a dialogue happening between the king and the prime minister, and you see a certain statements called Arya Chanakya Uvacha. Chanakya is saying this. And in few slokas it also mentioned about Kautilya. This clearly shows that, yes, Kautilya can be regarded as Chanakya. Now here, if you look at the contents of Arthasastra, what it exactly speaks about, the contents can be classified, or if you look at Arthasastra, the Arthasastra text can be understood it was written 2500 years old, no doubt, belonged to first millennium BC. However, during the colonial period, it lost its identity. It was in the year 1905. Very famous librarian by the name Ardche identified certain traces of Arthasastra and then took a great pain in translating it into the regional languages, majorly into English. And with this translation, the forgotten text was now brought to the light. And now this text became one of the major foundations for establishment of modern political system, including Indian political system. Till today, this text was considered to be one of the major treatises in understanding the emergence of political system. The major law schools, business schools, and public administration colleges teach Arthasastra as one of their analysis. If you look at Arthasastra and the contents, it was considered to be a combination of the 15 major books. 15 major books. Each book speaks precisely about one particular topic. These 15 books carry 150 chapters. 150 chapters. It was further classified into 160 sections, and finally comprises of 6,000 slokas. Can we call it slok? Rather we calling it slok, we can call it sutra. When I say the word sutra, I'm referring to a formula. It is to be noted that Kautilya was not creating a new political system. Now he analyzed certain prevailing political system, understood the loopholes prevailing at that point of time, and slowly systemized those kind of practices, and he formed them into certain formula. In this way, 6,000 sloks or 6,000 sutras were explained in this book. Each sutra explains about the duties, the code of conduct of certain subject towards their rule. So, Arthasastra, systematic study of resources, has got 15 books divided into 150 chapters and then 160 sections, totally of 6,000 sutras. If you look at the topic wise of 15 books, even they are very much interesting. Let us discuss about the 15 books, not in a detailed way, but in an aerial view. Discussing about the first book, this speaks about a topic called concerning the discipline. Concerning the discipline. It is normally called Krama Shikshan. What are the rules, code of conduct for a king, and how a king should be? Normally we understand from the Vedic period, the later Vedic period, the roles and responsibilities of the king and his officers called Amatyas, Dwadasha Ratnins. They have certain code of conduct to follow. They were mentioned in Raja Shastra, Raja Niti Shastra, Raja Dharma Shastra, Dharma Niti Shastra, etc. And they were so beautifully summarized in this first book called Concern with Discipline. So we can conclude, this speaks about the leadership. This speaks about how a leader should be and what makes a leader, the ingredients, the code of conduct, etc. The second book detailedly studies about the duties of government superintendents. What is the role and responsibility of Amatyas, the subordinates of king? What was their job profile? How the revenue system should function? What kind of taxes should be imposed? And how the taxes should be collected? And how king should take the contents of his subjects? All were clearly discussed in the second book called The Duties of Government Superintendents. So we can understand This book detailedly studies about economics. Studies about economics. We understand economics is a very recent term, took its origin from Wealth of Nations text written by Adam Smith. Economics took its roots oikos and nomos, which means household management. But we should not forget, before the creation of economics discipline, it was studied along with the political science. There was a school called London School of Economics. Prior it was called London School of Political Science and Economics. It was in 1776 period, economics took its a new route, new discipline. So the second book of Arthasastra speaks in detail about economics. If you look at the chapter 3, it speaks about concerning law. What is dharma and how king should understand dharma and how he should give a legal support for the subjects. He should use his intellect in separating good from the bad, satya from asatya. It was detailed discussed in the 3rd chapter, which speaks about concerning the law. Chapter 4 speaks about in making an empire, in making a dynasty, in making a kingdom, the leader will encounter certain hurdles. Chapter 4 beautifully analyzes upayas, strategies, how we should remove those thorns. So chapter 4 speaks about removing of thorns. If a leader is in making of his political system, he will encounter certain hurdles. Kautilya clearly explained how these hurdles should be handled, and he said war is not always a weapon or an instrument to fix it. He says upaya. First you should try some strategies. In failing of those strategies, then we can proceed for war. So war is an exemption in the thought of Kautilya. Chapter 4 speaks about removing of thorns. Chapter 5 speaks about conduct of courtiers. The advisors who are specialists in each and every field, who stay in the court of king, Swami, who advise him in their own respective fields, and the advice will be taken by the king, and being monarch, the king is a final decision maker. So however it was considered that the role of courtiers is to aid and advise Swami. It was discussed beautifully in the chapter 5. If you look at from chapter 3 to chapter 5, it clearly shows that it was discussing all about law. How a legal system should prevail and what legal system should be taken into consideration. Do we expect or can we expect a king was secular at that point of time? Everything can be understood from the chapters of 3, 4, 5 from Arthasastra. Chapter 6 speaks about the source sovereign states. Today we are calling a term, a word, state, which can be rightly translated into Sanskrit called Rajya or Rashtra. But the modern concept of state is different from the ancient concept of Rashtra. The elements are different, the strategy was different, even the intention of rule political system, the essence of political system was also different. However, the today's political system, the concept of state, no doubt took its roots from ancient period. Chapter number 7 speaks about the end of sixfold policy. The end of sixfold policy clearly speaks about what kind of political system should prevail at that point of time. And here we are going to speak now about Saptanga theory, including Swami, the monarch. We consider it as a Saptanga, 7 major elements. The role and responsibilities of a king in understanding them is clearly discussed in 7. In the number 8, which speaks about concerning the vices and the calamities. How hurdles occur in a political system and how it should be solved. That's interesting about Arthasastra. It also spoke about corruption. And he concluded corruption cannot be eliminated completely, but it can be regulated. This clearly shows that Kautilya was a very far-sighted person. If you look at the chapter 6, 7, 8, they clearly speak about the foreign policy. The foreign policy prevailed at point of time, at period of time. With the change in political system, definitely the foreign policy changes. This is how a change in government changes the foreign policy. However, we can consider that the modern concept, the foreign policy is very static. However, diplomacy keeps changing from one government to another government. Kautilya in his Arthasastra clearly mentioned what elements to be taken into consideration when you are drafting a foreign policy. So, chapter 1 speaks about leadership, chapter 2 speaks about economic, chapter 3, 4, 5 speaks about law, and 6, 7, 8 speaks about the foreign policy of Astra. Chapter 9 Chapter 9 speaks about the work of an invader. What kind of background work to be first to be made, to be practiced before waging any invasion was clearly discussed in the chapter 9. Chapter 10 speaks about the strategy of war. Like we discussed just now, In the opinion of Kautilya, war is not always recommended, it's only an exemption. However, this concept, war, has one of the major portions covered in Kautilya's Arthasastra. He said, a yudh, war, is of many types. Prakash yudh, Kut yudh. So waging a battle is not always recommended, but you can also fight two ways, direct ways and indirect ways. It was discussed in the chapter 9, chapter 10 and the following chapters. Chapter 11 speaks about the conduct of Chapter 11 speaks about the conduct of the corporations. It's very interesting to know that even that point of time, the concept of corporations exists. We understand the corporation is of very recent origin. However, the system prevailed in ancient period itself. Chapter 12 speaks about how to attack a powerful enemy. So it speaks about strategy. Strategy to defeat a powerful king. It clearly shows that Kautilya covered almost all areas in political system. He gave what kind of mindset an invader should carry and how he should wage a war. And he clearly dedicated one book. If a king is powerful, then how you should make him powerless. And this is how we can understand the most powerful kingdom called Nanda Empire was completely dethroned. Europe, the great goes to Chanakya and Chandragupta. So we can understand chapter 12 speaks about a strategy to defeat a powerful king. Chapter 13 speaks about, here Kautilya focused on the fort. The fort is not of, it's called Durga in Saptanga theory, which has got a great significance in the kingdom. So, strategy to capture the fort. Strategy to capture the forts were clearly discussed in the book 13. Whereas in chapter 14, speaks about the secret means. The secret means. How the spy system should prevail and how the activities should be done. If you look at the concept of spy system, it carried from very ancient time. Kautilya recommended a king to employ common man as a good spy. He recommended even the prostitutes can play a better role in spying and providing information, the required information to the king when they need it. Chapter 9 to 14. One thing is very common to understand. It speaks about war in detail. War in detail. This clearly shows that out of the 15 chapters, he dedicated maximum chapters for explaining the concept of war and how kings should understand war and what kind of strategies he should introduce and what kind of armory he should carry and how he should attack a powerful king and how can he make a powerful king powerless Introducing the concept of spy is clearly discussed in all these chapters. Chapter 15 speaks about the treaties. The plan of a treatise the plan of a treatise. The final book speaks in detail what Kautilya is trying to convey. Her conclusion can be properly understood from the book 15. So, this can be understood, yes, he spoke about the methodology, that he focused on, and he expressed it further. In the beginning of Kautilya's Arthasastra in the chapter 1, you see, he gave, I write this treatise so that the previous treatise will be covered. The intention of the treatise is to acquire and protect the resources in a systematic way. Whereas in the last book, the plan of treatise, he explains by understanding, by following all these rules, an individual or king can get a good command over how to acquire and protect resources and further. This clearly shows that he gave a complete picture on how to handle these kind of situations. What makes a king more powerful? So these are all the 15 books he covered in a very famous topics. So we can summarize. Arthashastra is not about political science. It's about leadership. It's about economics. It's about law. It's about foreign policy. It's about war strategy. And finally, it's about the methodology. Understanding these in the books, the total 150 chapters also speaks about ethics, how the social institutions prevail, and what kind of society is good for living. So we can conclude, it also speaks about ethics, administration, etc. In this way, we can conclude that this text is not a static. It's all about how a political thinker thinks and how he can frame a political system and how this system can overcome the hurdles in the period of time. So the contents are very clear. They are stating the political system structure and its process. So we can understand here, it's not only speaking about theory, it's also speaking about the process and how to achieve finally the results. Understanding the concept of Saptanga theory is no doubt Kautilya gave more emphasis on the concept of Rajya. Today we call the concept of state has got certain elements. The major elements that make a state complete, the constants of the elements of a state, we normally consider now as population. We consider a territory. We consider government. We consider sovereignty. And the fifth element we can take partially into consideration is international recognition. So we understand the modern state is taking major five elements into consideration in calling it a state. However, this concept of state is a recent origin. It believes in a theory called social contract theory. It rejects the concept of divine right theory. It believes today's theory was no doubt the result of evolutionary, and that was in fact an agreement between the ruler and the ruled. Whereas in Kautilya's Arthasastra, he mentioned it can be called, that system can be called Rashtra or Rajya only if it satisfies the Saptanga, the seven limbs of a state. The modern theory we speak about a four or five limbs, elements of the state, whereas in Saptanga theory we have seven major limbs. We consider to be Swami, king, Amatya, the supervisors, the superintendents, Janapada, today we call it as territory, Kosa, nothing about the treasury, Bhala, army, Durga, which means fort, and the seventh one to be considered as Mitra. If you observe, Kautilya never called them neighbors. He called them Mitra, friends. This clearly shows that the main intention of a king should make his neighbors friends. And he used a term Ari for identifying, focusing on enemies. And he also said, Ari Ari Mitra, enemy's enemy is a friend. So, we can conclude here that Saptanga theory took its roots in the literal form only in the 600 BC period. In the 600 BC period in the form of Mahajanapadas. This is why we give credit to the 6th century BC period that the political history took its roots from this phase because it satisfied Saptanga theory. Now 600 BC, now we are speaking the modern concept state, the modern Indian phase or modern world history phase, which took its roots, by the way, in the 19th and 20th century. And 20th century. We'll have some questions in our mind saying why the seven was comprised into a 4 or 5. because the involvement, the administrative structure was radically transformed. But if you still see which is more relevant, the credit goes to Saptanga theory. This theory claims that each should be understood in a very defined way and that should be given an importance. Today we don't see a concept of Durga. Today we see a concept of Bala. We see a concept of Kosa. We see a concept of Swami. We see a concept of Amatya. We see a concept of Janapada. This clearly shows that with a change in time, the political system got transformed. We will understand in this period of journey that how this political system transformed and shaped to this form, today's form. Another question comes in our mind. Don't you think the Saptanga theory prevailed in Indus Valley civilization? You don't know. How about Vedic period? In Vedic period, if you observe the concept, there is no term called Janapada mentioned in Vedas. The concept of Jana was mentioned but not Janapada. Similarly, Swami was mentioned, Amatya was mentioned, whereas the concept of Kosa was not properly mentioned. And Bala was not given significance. In the later Vedic period from 1000 BC to 600 BC period, it is slowly now taking its shape. The Swami, who's now we call monarch, in the later Vedic period, he started ruling with the help of Dwadasha Ratins, 12 major Amatyas, the people who help in his administration. So, there are certain elements missing in Saptanga theory even in the later Vedic period. It's in the post-later Vedic period and in the emergence of Mahajanapadas, this phase normally called as 600 BC phase. Here, the concept of Saptanga theory can be seen in the real literal form. So, this is why we call the Indian political history begins from 600 BC. Why are we taking only Arthasastra but not other sources in speaking about Indian political history? Because it is one of the oldest political treatises that spoke about Indian subcontinent, that took its roots in Indian subcontinent. As we are referring to Indian history, we take Indian text into consideration, but not the Greeks or not the Egyptians. Now let us understand its influence. The text has become much more interesting and prominent in the later days, both in the medieval and the modern, even in the ancient. No doubt we can say that Kautilya's Arthasastra laid a red carpet for the next political thinkers to frame their required political system. For example, the influence of Arthasastra can be understood under certain areas. For example, its influence or its relevance. Kautilya's Arthasastra gave a beacon, a light for the future generations to frame their required political system. Among them, number one, a very famous political scientist in the Gupta period, and he wrote a famous text called Nitisara. Famous political scientist in Gupta's period, Kamandaka, Nitisara, was considered as Arthasastra of Guptas. The name itself is significant that, the comparison itself is significant that Yes, Kautilya's Arthasastra paved generation for the next great mighty empires post 400 BC period. Then, if you look at the in the international platform, it was in the 16th century phase. It was in the 16th century phase, a very famous political scientist who belonged to Europe, precisely in Italy, is called Machiavelli. Machiavelli's The Prince Machiavelli's The Prince speaks about how a king should be. It speaks about the territories, types of territories. It also speaks about types of kingdoms. It also speaks about what kings should take into consideration while ruling, while forming legislations, while executing them, and while analyzing the truth with untruth. He said a king should be a combination of both lion and wolf, fox. He said a king should be as mighty as lion and as cunning as fox. This clearly shows that certain phrases of Arthashastra no doubt inspired even the Europe writers, thinkers. And it was no doubt rightly called Machiavelli as Italian Kautilya. And some Indian scholars call Kautilya as Indian Machiavelli. Calling Kautilya as Indian Machiavelli, we can call it some kind of injustice to Kautilya, because looking at the chronology, in fact, it was considered to be a grand master. And this text, which laid a foundation for other political thinkers to think on the same pattern and frame a new political system. So no doubt Kautilya gave a lightning hope for the next generation to inspire, frame their own political system. Today we understand Indian foreign policy, and we call it as Nehruvian foreign policy. So, the Indian foreign policy, which takes consideration the non-alignment movement, Panchasheel, disarmament, Afro-Asian bias, pro-democracy, anti-colonialism, anti-racialism, believing in international relations. No doubt, the current foreign policy took its roots from the ancient Kautilya's Arthashastra. Finally, we can conclude it had a great impact in the history of Asia. Major influence on the Asia's political system. Major influence on the Asia's political system. However, we conclude that Kautilya's Arthashastra has got no boundaries. It crossed the seas, it crossed the mountains, entered into other foreign countries and shaped their political system too. However, scholars in Greece, people like Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, who were considered to be more philosophers, gave their own print in their political system. But definitely we can say that putting all those political treaties and Kautilya's Arthashastra considered to be much more far-sighted one and more relevant even today. So here we can understand, understanding the four major areas. Arthasastra defines clearly the roles and responsibilities of an administrator and what he should take into consideration while administering. It's so interesting to know that the early Mauryan period, they followed Arthasastra and they ruled the kingdom accordingly. Today we see even the Arthasastra was utilized in or used in training many military people, especially Pakistan, China, USA. They believe certain elements in Arthasastra should be taken into consideration while framing their policies. It is so, or we can conclude that yes, India is the first country to forget the greatness of Kautilya's Arthasastra. What is missing is the confidence in the political system, the political leaders. This text should be made compulsory, like the Constitution of India, in all major schools and colleges, so that the upcoming generation can realize the hidden fruits in the ancient India. Thank you.